When a seemingly perfect family vacation takes a dark turn, a mother's quiet obsession with protecting her daughter leads her with no other option but prayer. A series of unsettling interruptions shattered their peaceful retreat, and they were left with nothing else but their faith. Once upon a time, there lived Chika, who had always been a curious girl. Her village, Nsaka, was small, but the world seemed so much bigger when she thought about it. Every day she walked the dusty paths with her mother, listening to the elders' stories, filled with heroes and magical places. But now, as she stood at the bus stop, waiting for the bus that would take her to the city for the first time, she felt something strange stir in the pit of her stomach. The bus was taking a long time. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the ground, but there was an unusual stillness in the air, almost as if the whole world was holding its breath. "Chika, come sit here," her mother called, waving her hand toward a bench under the big tree. The shade was a relief from the heat, but Chika couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Ma, the bus is taking too long," Chika said, her eyes scanning the empty road. The trees around them seemed to whisper in the breeze, but they were the only ones there. "Don't worry, it will come," her mother reassured her, but even her voice didn't seem as steady as usual. "Do you remember the prayer I taught you?" Chika nodded. She had said that prayer every day, without fail, but now it felt like it meant something more. She pulled out the small book her mother had given her and silently mouthed the words. As she looked up, her gaze fell on something strange, a man standing at the edge of the dirt road. He was tall, dressed in an old jacket that seemed too heavy for the warm afternoon. His eyes locked onto hers, and she froze. There was something cold in his stare, something that made her heart race. "Ma," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Look at that man." Her mother turned, but by the time she did, the man had already turned and was walking into the thick woods at the side of the road. Chika couldn't explain it, but she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the heat. Something wasn't right. She couldn't shake the feeling that the man was watching them. The bus finally arrived, its engine sputtering as it slowed down in front of the bench where Chika and her mother sat. The doors creaked open, and a few people climbed out, stretching their legs after the long journey. "Let's go, Chika," her mother said, standing up and grabbing her bag. "We can't keep the bus waiting." Chika nodded, but her eyes lingered on the edge of the road, where the man had disappeared into the trees. The bus driver was a young man, with a tired face and a thick beard. He gave a brief smile as Chika and her mother boarded. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "To the city," Chika's mother replied, settling into a seat by the window. Chika sat next to her, but her eyes kept straying to the window. Outside, the village was slowly disappearing, replaced by the open road stretching out ahead. The trees thinned, and they passed small villages with children playing and farmers working in the fields. The bus ride was peaceful at first, but as the sun began to set, the mood inside the bus started to shift. The air grew heavy, and Chika felt a growing unease. She glanced out the window again, and for a split second, she saw the figure of the man from earlier, standing by the side of the road, watching the bus. "Ma, look," Chika whispered, her voice tight with fear. But when her mother turned to look, there was nothing there, just the empty road and the fading light of the day. Her mother smiled softly, but Chika could see the worry in her eyes. "It's nothing, Chika. Don't worry." But Chika couldn't shake the feeling that the man wasn't just someone passing by. There was something strange about him, something that didn't belong. The bus rumbled along the winding road, the tires humming on the rough pavement. Chika tried to distract herself by watching the passing scenery. She knew her mother was trying to reassure her, but the unease lingered in the pit of her stomach. The road stretched ahead, surrounded by thick forest on both sides. The sun had set, and the sky had turned a deep purple, with stars beginning to twinkle above. The passengers in the bus were quiet, some dozing off, others lost in their own thoughts. But then, out of nowhere, there was a loud thud, a jolt that made the entire bus shake. Everyone shot up from their seats, startled, and the bus swerved slightly. "What was that?" one of the passengers shouted. The driver slammed his foot on the brakes, and the bus screeched to a halt. Everyone was thrown forward, but fortunately, no one was hurt. The driver, looking flustered, quickly got out of his seat and walked to the back of the bus. "I'll go check," he called, stepping out into the dark night. Chika's heart raced. What had happened? What was that noise? The bus sat in an eerie silence, the only sound the wind rustling through the trees. Chika felt her throat dry up, and she turned to her mother, but she wasn't looking at her. Her eyes were fixed on something outside, her face pale. "Ma, what is it?" Chika asked, her voice shaking. Her mother didn't answer at first. She just kept staring out the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Chika followed her mother's gaze and gasped. There, just outside the bus, standing under the flickering light, was the man. The same man who had been at the bus stop earlier. He was standing in the shadows, barely visible, but his eyes glowed in the darkness, fixed on the bus. The bus driver returned, looking more confused than ever. "There's nothing out there," he said, shaking his head. "No damage to the bus. But it's odd, something doesn't feel right." The passengers muttered among themselves, their faces showing signs of fear. Chika could hear them whispering in low voices, but it was as though everyone was afraid to speak too loudly. "Should we move?" one of the passengers asked. "We can't just stay here in the middle of nowhere." The bus driver paused, looking at the strange figure outside once more. "We'll wait a little longer. It's not safe to drive in the dark if there's something wrong with the road." Chika sat back in her seat, her eyes locked on the window. The man was gone, but the unsettling feeling in her stomach remained. She couldn't shake the thought of the man with the glowing eyes. Something was wrong. She could feel it. The night seemed to stretch on forever. The bus driver eventually decided to continue the journey, though the atmosphere inside the bus was tense. Everyone sat in silence, the only sound the hum of the engine. Chika couldn't stop thinking about the man. Where had he gone? Why had he been watching them? And why did it feel like they were being followed? The bus passed through small villages, their lights twinkling like fireflies in the distance. But the air was an eerie stillness to the world outside. No animals stirred in the woods, no sounds came from the villages. The world was holding its breath again. Then, without warning, the bus jerked to the side. Chika gasped as the bus swerved violently. It almost tipped over before the driver managed to regain control. The passengers screamed, and Chika's heart skipped a beat. She grabbed her mother's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Everyone, stay calm," the bus driver shouted. "It's just a flat tire. Nothing to worry about." But Chika wasn't so sure. She looked out the window again and saw a figure in the distance, moving slowly toward the bus. The man was back. The figure grew closer with every passing moment, his movements deliberate, almost as though he was walking toward them with a purpose. Chika's heart hammered in her chest as she watched him draw nearer. She felt a shiver run down her spine, but this time, she didn't look away. She couldn't. "Ma, do you see him?" Chika whispered, barely able to form the words. Her mother didn't respond immediately, but Chika could feel the tension in the air. Her mother's grip tightened on her hand, and Chika saw her mother's face pale under the dim light of the bus. "I see him," her mother murmured. "Stay quiet, Chika. We need to be still." The man was no longer just a shadow at the edge of the road, he was standing right beside the bus, his figure towering over them. His eyes, those unnerving eyes, shone with an eerie light. He didn't say a word, just stood there, looking at them. It was as if he was waiting for something only he knew. The driver turned to the passengers. "Stay calm," he said again, though his voice trembled slightly. "Don't make any sudden moves. I'll get us out of here." But Chika could see the fear in his eyes. It wasn't the kind of fear one showed when they were simply startled. This was something deeper, something primal. Her mother shifted uncomfortably beside her. Chika could feel her tension growing by the second. "We have to pray, Chika," her mother whispered, pressing the small prayer book into her hands. "Pray, and don't look back." Chika nodded, clutching the book tightly. She closed her eyes and whispered the words her mother had taught her, hoping the familiar rhythm would calm her racing heart. But even as she prayed, the fear inside her grew. She could feel the man's gaze on her, and though her eyes were shut, it was like he was right there, standing just inches away from her. The air felt heavy, thick with something she couldn't understand. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of a loud bang from beneath the bus. Everyone jumped, and the driver's face turned an even deeper shade of white. He quickly moved to the front, pulling open the door and rushing out into the night. The figure outside didn't move, still staring, his glowing eyes never leaving the bus. Minutes passed in agonizing silence, but it felt like hours. Chika's mind raced, her thoughts swirling in a storm of confusion and dread. Why was the bus stuck? Why wouldn't the man leave? And why did it feel like something terrible was about to happen? The bus door finally creaked open, and the driver returned, but this time, he didn't look quite the same. His eyes were wide, and his face was drenched with sweat. He was panting heavily as if he had run a marathon. "There's no way to fix it here," he said, his voice shaky. "The tire's beyond repair. We'll have to wait for help," but he trailed off, looking outside with growing fear. Chika's breath caught in her throat as she realized that the man was still there, standing in the same spot, his eyes locked on the bus. But now, something was different. He wasn't just watching. He was waiting for something, just like before. "Why is he still out there?" one of the passengers muttered. "I don't know," the driver said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't like this. Something's wrong. We should have never stopped here." A murmur of agreement passed through the passengers, but no one dared to move. The night had grown colder, and Chika could feel her body tense with every passing second. Her mother squeezed her hand again. "We need to stay calm," she said softly. "Pray, Chika." Chika nodded and closed her eyes again, reciting the prayer in her mind. She didn't know what else to do. The bus was stuck, the man was still there, and help seemed a lifetime away. The fear gnawing at her chest grew heavier, and with each passing minute, it felt harder to breathe. Then, just as Chika opened her eyes, she saw something that made her heart drop into her stomach. The man was no longer alone. There, emerging from the shadows of the forest, were more figures. They were too far to make out clearly, but Chika could see their movements, slow, deliberate, as if they were walking toward the bus with the same purpose as the first man. "What is this?" Chika gasped, her voice trembling. Her mother's face went pale as she leaned closer to her. "We need to get away, Chika," she whispered urgently. "We have to pray harder." The figures grew closer, their faces still hidden in the dark, but their eyes, those same glowing eyes, shone in the night like tiny, unnatural stars. Chika's pulse raced, and she wanted to scream, but the words caught in her throat. What were these people? Why were they following the bus? Why did they look so wrong? "Is anyone coming?" another passenger asked, their voice full of desperation. "What's happening?" The driver looked out the window, his eyes wide with fear. "No one is coming. We are alone out here. And those things, they aren't normal. We are not safe." The man and his companions were almost on the bus now, moving closer with every heartbeat, their steps slow but inevitable. Chika's body felt frozen, as if it couldn't move, couldn't think. All she could do was stare at them, her mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. Then, without warning, the man outside spoke. His voice was low, like a growl. It didn't sound like a human voice at all. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his words making Chika's blood run cold. "Now, you belong to us." Chika's breath caught in her throat. Her heart slammed against her ribcage. Her mother pressed her face into her lap, whispering another prayer, her voice shaking. But the words didn't seem to reach Chika. The terror was too great, the figures outside too close. Something dark, something ancient, was closing in on them. The atmosphere was suffocating, and every second that passed felt like a lifetime. The fear in the bus had reached its peak, but the night was still silent, as though waiting for something to break it. The man's gaze never wavered. It was as though he was waiting for something that only he knew would come next. And Chika could feel it deep in her bones. The silence outside the bus was deafening, broken only by the sound of Chika's shaky breath and the soft murmurs of her mother's prayer. Chika could hear the heavy thud of her own heart in her chest, and the cold, unsettling presence of the figures outside pressed in on her like a suffocating weight. The man spoke again, his voice low and menacing, almost as if it were coming from the very air itself. "You should not have come to this place. Now, it is too late." Chika tried to swallow, but her throat was dry. What did he mean? Why were they all so afraid? What was happening? Her mind raced with questions, but no answers seemed to come. Her mother's whispering prayers were growing more frantic now. "Lord, protect us. Keep us safe." The passengers sat frozen, too scared to move or speak, as the figures outside gathered around the bus. Chika could barely make out their forms in the dark, but she could feel their eyes upon her. She felt their presence deep in her bones, like a shadow that stretched across the entire bus, suffocating it, swallowing all light. "Do not look away," the man said, his voice soft now, almost a command. "You must see the truth." Without thinking, Chika turned her head to look out the window. The figures were close now, too close, and for a moment, the world seemed to shift. The shadows around them stretched and warped, as if reality itself was bending. She could see their eyes, those glowing, unnatural eyes, and they seemed to burn into her soul. For a split second, she saw something she couldn't unsee. The man wasn't human. His skin was pale, too pale, and his features were twisted, as though they belonged to something not quite alive. His eyes glowed like fire, and his smile stretched too wide, too sharp, like a predator that had found its prey. Chika recoiled, her stomach turning. "Ma, they are not real, are they?" Her mother's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, but she shook her head, as though trying to shake off the terror. "We must pray harder, Chika. Just trust in the Lord. Keep praying." But the terror that gripped Chika's heart was too strong. The figures outside were no longer just watching. They were circling the bus, slowly, methodically, their footsteps quiet but deliberate. She could hear the creak of the wood beneath their feet, like the sound of something ancient, something that had been waiting for this moment. One by one, the figures stepped closer, their eyes never leaving the bus. Then, the man who had spoken earlier stepped forward, his glowing eyes fixed directly on Chika. He raised a hand, and it felt like the entire world held its breath. Title: Families, Why You Need to Pray Before You Travel. Suddenly, the bus door swung open with a loud screech. The sound echoed through the night, piercing the silence. Chika gasped, her heart nearly stopping in her chest. The bus driver stood there, frozen, his eyes wide with terror. I couldn't fix the tire," he stammered. It's not just a flat. There's something wrong with the engine too," something's blocking us from leaving. We are stuck here." The words hit Chika like a slap. They were trapped. The figures outside weren't going to let them go. They couldn't escape. Her mother grabbed Chika's hand tightly, her fingers digging into her skin. "We need to get out of here. We need to run." But where could they go? The bus was surrounded. The dark forest loomed on every side, and the figures were closing in, their glowing eyes fixed on the bus like hungry wolves stalking their prey. Chika looked at her mother, her mind racing for an escape, but there was no way out. Her body was frozen with fear, and the prayer her mother had taught her seemed like a distant memory now. The man outside raised his hand again, and the air grew colder. The shadows around them seemed to stretch even further, and the world felt like it was closing in. Chika tried to move, but her body wouldn't obey. It was as if time itself had stopped. Then, the man's voice echoed in her mind, louder than ever before. "You cannot escape. Not this time." A loud crash shattered the night, and Chika felt the bus jerk violently. She was thrown forward, her head slamming into the seat in front of her. The lights flickered, and the engine sputtered, groaning as though it were being strangled. Panic erupted inside the bus. People screamed, scrambling to find an escape, but there was no way out. The windows were sealed shut, and the doors refused to open. The figures outside had begun to move, their steps growing faster, more urgent, as though they were closing in for the kill. "Help us," someone screamed, but there was no response. The only sound was the haunting crackling of the air, the whispering wind, and the ever-growing, ever-closing footsteps of the figures. Chika tried to scream, but her throat felt dry and tight. Her heart pounded in her chest, and all she could do was watch in helpless terror as the figures outside began to surround the bus, their glowing eyes piercing the night. The man's voice echoed again, this time louder, as though it were coming from inside the bus. "You will all be ours. The darkness is your home now." Her mother pulled her close, her voice trembling as she whispered, "We have to get out of here, Chika. We have to pray. Pray, my child. We must fight back." Chika felt her mother's grip tighten, and though the words of the prayer seemed faint in her mind, she began to whisper them, her voice shaky. "Please, Lord, protect us. Deliver us from this evil." The words felt weak, useless, as the figures continued to close in, their eyes glowing brighter and brighter. But then, something unexpected happened. A light, brighter than the stars, suddenly pierced the darkness. It shone from the bus's roof, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. The shadows recoiled, like they were being burned by the light, and the figures froze, their eyes dimming for a brief moment. Chika's heart leaped in her chest. The light was pushing them back. She could feel it, someone, was helping them. The light that had suddenly appeared above the bus grew brighter, so intense that it seemed to push the very darkness away. Chika blinked, squinting against the radiance, trying to make sense of it. The figures outside recoiled, their glowing eyes dimming, their bodies twitching as though the light burned them. The once oppressive silence was now filled with an eerie crackling sound as the shadows pulled back, retreating into the dark corners of the forest. Her mother held her close, her arms trembling as she whispered prayers with a new intensity. "We are not alone," her voice was a quiet strength, filled with newfound hope. "He is with us." The bus seemed to shake once more, but this time, it wasn't from the dark force that had been surrounding them. It was something different, something powerful, almost comforting. The light above them pulsed like a heartbeat, growing steadier, brighter. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light surged, blindingly brilliant. Chika had to shield her eyes, but when she looked again, the figures were gone. The man who had been standing outside, his monstrous smile etched into her memory, was nowhere to be seen. The creatures, the shadows, all of it had vanished into the night. The forest was silent once more, as if the terrifying presence had never existed at all. The driver, still shaken but filled with a strange relief, stepped forward and quickly turned the key in the ignition. The bus roared to life. It wasn't smooth, but it was enough to get them moving. He threw a quick glance out the window, eyes wide with disbelief. I don't know what happened, but we're moving. The bus began to move forward, and for the first time that night, Chika felt a sense of peace settle over her. The oppressive weight that had filled the air was gone. The forest, once dark and menacing, seemed ordinary again, bathed in the dim light of the rising moon. They were safe, at least for now. The passengers, who had been frozen in terror, slowly began to speak. Some were still too shaken to form complete sentences. Others stared out the windows, their eyes wide with confusion, unsure if what they had just experienced had been real or a collective nightmare. But Chika knew. She had felt it, the darkness, the terror, the feeling that they were being watched. And she had also felt the light, the strength, the power, the protection that had shielded them when all seemed lost. Her mother sighed, her voice trembling. "Thank God. Thank you for hearing our prayers." Chika nodded, but she didn't say anything. Her mind was still racing, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. What were those things outside the bus? Why had they come? And why had they left so suddenly? But as the bus rumbled back onto the main road, heading towards safety, Chika realized that some questions didn't have easy answers. Some things weren't meant to be understood. Not yet, anyway. As they drove through the quiet night, the last traces of the mysterious figures faded into the shadows, and the tension that had gripped the bus began to slowly ease. The world outside seemed peaceful again. In the end, Chika acknowledged that indeed prayer works, and it was those prayers that saved their life, and it is very important to have faith in God.